welcome to another episode of Euphoric, the podcast. I have such a special guest here today that I cannot wait to ask so many questions of because she is truly one of the wisest people I've ever met. And we actually met on a retreat together in Brazil, and she just has such a remarkable story. So we're going to get into so much here. But Alisa, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing awesome. I was sharing with you earlier. I just launched my podcast yesterday, so I feel like you're an expert in this already, and I'm like a newbie. So I'm just excited to be interviewed by you today, so I kind of see how it's done.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I can't wait to go into this. You are so multifaceted. I feel like there's so many different things you've done in your life and that you could speak about. But one of the most just touching moments I've ever heard was how you were able to deal with the grief so radically and then also so spiritually and so open-heartedly. And so I'd love if you could tell our audience a little bit about your story, both maybe who you are today right now, and then kind of going a little backwards in time. Because I think that grief, especially in the alcohol-free space and the sober curiosity space, like there's not one of us that's not going to go through, an intense grief experience. Like everybody we know is going to deal with something like that. And it's often something that can lead to more maladaptive habits and patterns and stuff like that. And there might be stuff like way back from when we were younger that we never dealt with. And it's a really interesting topic that you've really alchemized into something so beautiful in your life. I just respect you so much for that. But all right, I'll stop talking. You take it away now. Tell us more about you and kind of your origin.
Well, thank you again for having me on. I'm really excited to be able to share, uh, who I am today. So my name is Alisa Cooper, and my origin story of what brought me through learning how to alchemize grief to freedom started as a teenager. My husband who passed away, we met as teenagers. And if you're familiar with the movie The Notebook, that was very similar to our story. The thing that took a pivot for us is as teenagers back then, we didn't have cell phones. There was no internet, and he lived an hour and a half north of me. We met, I was an athlete, a gymnast. We met over a summer that my mom made me take time off from gymnastics, and I went and stayed at my aunt's house. And she literally was like the block mom, cool aunt, maybe I think 12 or 13 years older than me, so fairly young. And she was where it was the flop house. All of my cousins hung out there. And then that's how I met David, is through my cousins. And it was a whirlwind of a teenage love romance, just held hands, kissed a little bit, and that was it. But I was like swooned, and I always tell people that he had my heart at the moment that I met him, because my number one need and want is freedom. And when I met him, he had a toothbrush in the back of his pocket. And I was like, why would you have a toothbrush in the back of your pocket? And he said, I don't know where my head's going to land at night, but I know that I'm going to need to brush my teeth in the morning. It's like, that's freedom. So that's where it like started. We both married other people and created families, but we always kept in touch with my aunt and then my cousins. And then when my aunt was always trying to get us together, but I was married, and then David also had been married. And of course, we never like drew the lines of that, but we always asked about each other, like, how are they doing? How's Alyssa doing? How's David doing? And when I was in the middle of a divorce, and prior to that, my aunt used to say, if it's the last thing I ever do, it's going to be to get you two together. And sure enough, my aunt passed away, and I was in the middle of a separation of my husband at the time. And Dave and I reconnected, and we were married a year later. And coming full circle to how it became a grief, basically part of my life. David and I had been married for 16 years, and we were celebrating our anniversary. We had created a life we didn't need a vacation from, and we were helping others do the same thing. We had created 6 businesses and also systemized my brick and mortar at the time. I owned a gymnastics school in Washington State, and I had owned it 12 years prior to us being married. So he taught me how to systemize it. And basically, we were able to travel around the world operating these other businesses. And we were on a cruise in Europe, which was part of our huge live list. We wanted to go to Scotland and Ireland. And it was our last stop, and we were coming to Liverpool, and I found him in the shower, and he had a brain bleed. in two places. And he lived for 5 days, and they were the most beautiful 5 days you could ever imagine, not understanding that he would actually leave his body. I had never thought 1 second that he was going to leave his body. I thought for sure he was coming home and that was going to be our story, like how the Mullers survived David having a stroke, and that epic return. And on the fifth day, we were making plans of how we were going to come back home from Liverpool. And the doctor made a mistake, and ultimately it took his life. And so even retelling the story, the pain is it still resides, in me, even though I've done a pretty kick-ass job acknowledging the grief, speaking to the grief, and alchemizing the grief. It's still there. It probably, and it's okay, like it'll probably be there and could be potentially there until I leave my body. But I look at it now as I'm so grateful for the life that the Mullers gave me, because Alisa Muller is with David now. And I went through a series of deaths and rebirths since he left his body to create the life that I have now as Alisa Cooper. And I found a movement, I found my ultimate why of why I said yes to being in this experience of this human experience. And I also understand that in this movement, it is to call others to find their authentic self as well, and to live in your gift and know that this human experience is a series of deaths and rebirths. And if you can learn how to see grief as an ingredient for internal ascension, that's something that I have been through talking about through other people that have had me on their podcasts. And one in particular is my metaphysical maven. She's actually the one that came up with hey, how about if we had a conversation about how we could look and appreciate grief more if we knew it was an ingredient for ascension? How would we look at it differently? And that's how ultimately I was able to come to this frame of being Alisa Cooper and really falling in love with who I am as a person. And it was because of David's death that I was able to do that.
Alyssa, you've shared the story with me before, but I just get teary-eyed all over again, and just respect and appreciate so much your vulnerability and just sharing your heart, and it's just such a beautiful love that you have to share with him. And I have so many questions to kind of go into the healing journey, and just so much respect for what you built after such a, tragic occurrence in your life. And I'm curious if there was ever a part of you that ever contemplated perhaps like having life without David? Like if there's ever part of you that somehow knew that this would be part of your journey, or if was it like a complete shock to your system and your soul?
This is such a fascinating question, and I have not shared this publicly, but I've shared this privately. When I was 22 years old, I had been raised in the church, a Baptist church, so very spiritually raised. And after I was baptized, I had a download from God that said, we are all one. We're energetically connected, and God is within each of us. And I told my grandmother that, and she literally looked at me like I had just had a conversation with Satan, and like, oh my gosh, like this prayer seance over me. And so I never talked about it again until later, obviously. But when I was 22, because of that indoctrination of the church, I was invited to go have a reading. And it was like a palm reader, a tarot card reader, just a channeler. And it was my second mom that invited me. And I was like, oh, my grandmother, who passed away at this time, she would be rolling over in her grave if she knew I was like thinking about going to something like this. But I said yes. I was like, I'm going to support my second mom and do this. So it was during that reading, and I used to have the recording and I took it around with me for forever, and now I can't find it. But the recording basically stated that you will have multiple loves in your life. And I was married at the time to the father of my child and never thought I would ever get divorced. We had literally been married for a couple of years, and Elena was she was like a one or 2 years old. So maybe we were in our third or fourth year of being married. And I remember thinking, well, that's shocking. Like, I'm not ever going to get divorced or full of crap, Uh, and then, she said a lot of like the impact that I would make on the world would have ripples past my life. And I was like, well, yeah, I'm a gymnastics coach. I instill teaching life skills through the sport of gymnastics. Yeah, it's going to live long after I die. So I'm like mentally putting into like, okay, yeah, you're still not shocking me, blah, blah, blah. So then she says, I see you in your 80s. You're very beautiful, very put together. You've had a beautiful life, maybe late 80s. You're definitely fulfilled more than you thought that you would in impacting the world. But those of you that know you know that there's something within you that is saddened, like you've carried grief your whole life. And she said, I see rolling green hills like Ireland or Scotland. And it is there that you've lost a love, something happened. And it was there that your entire life changed, the whole trajectory. And basically, you built a movement after that around this one incident, experience, occurrence. And I was like, this is crazy. And I just like pushed it away, like never thought about it again. I actually remember telling my daughter when she was like old enough to obviously understand it. But I was like, yeah, this crazy thing happened. And I think she was like 11 or 12. So then, we had just visited Scotland and Ireland. And David, the night before night before I found him in the shower, not the night before he passed, but the night before I found him in the shower, he said, remember that reading that you got, like we were just in Ireland and Scotland and nothing bad happened. So I think it's a home run. Like we're good. We're good to go. And then the next morning was when I found him in the shower. And it's so interesting to look back and know that I didn't think about that. So my days didn't follow, oh my gosh, what is this epic thing that's going to happen in my life? But it clicked very quickly when David passed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know if that was what you were after, but that's what clicked in my brain when you asked that question. I was like, oh, this is interesting.
Fascinating. You told me such a beautiful story too of like knowing the moment that he passed and like being in communication with them. Would you mind sharing that today?
Yeah, so when he was in his body, we used to telepathically talk all the time. And he would be in his podcasting room, I'd be in mine, or like workspace. And I remember like knowing, okay, David needs me. And I just opened the door. I'm like, hey, babe, what do you need? And he, it was just very comical that he knew when I was coming home before I was coming home. And just energetically, we were very connected. So when he left his body, uh, the night that he uh, had the incident, I was called over because I was in a dorm room across the street staying while he was under care in Liverpool. They did such a beautiful job with him as well. And the nurse could barely talk. And I just remember her saying, you need to come over here and sign some paperwork so we can put your husband into theater. And that's just another word for surgery. And I didn't know that before, but then I understood what theater was. I was like, okay, whoa, he's going to surgery. Okay. So I went across, I touched his body. He was still in his body at this time, but he was definitely in an induced coma. Well, then the night passed, and the next day, I went, to meet with the doctors to see if anything had changed after the surgery. And I touched his body and I knew he was no longer in his body. But I was still very optimistic that people come back from comas. So I walked to the Starbucks that I had been walking to every day because in Liverpool, you're only allowed to be in the hospital of this particular department in the hospital for 2 hours during the day. So I would spend my day in Starbucks because that was very normal for David and I to be traveling and find a local coffee shop and work from. So it was therein that David started talking to me. And I remember just feeling his presence and having this conversation with him and immediately being worried, like, where are you at? What is it like where you're at? Before he could even like say a lot. And he said, my mom is here and my brother's here. And when we were teenagers, him and his brother were in an accident, a car accident, and he passed away. And he said, I said, describe it for me. And he said, it's just magic. It feels the most purest form of love that I've ever felt. I'm in no pain, pure joy. It's magic. And I asked him to take me where he was, so he pulled me where he was. And besides, describing the day that my daughter was born, there's really nothing else that I could ever describe that I've humanly been a part of in this experience that can relate. So those of you that are moms or dads, when you hold your child for the first time or you're giving birth and you have this experience, there is this unequivocal love that is no other love. And up until that point, it would probably be the love that I had for David, that could compare to the love of the birth of my child. And this was nothing compared to that. The feeling, the euphoric feeling, honestly, like it's just pure bliss, pure magic. And and then I came back into my body and we just started talking about the choices that he was going to have to make. And ironically or not, this is part of their first question, is we had already had the conversations about death long before we knew either of us would die. We both assumed we would be in our 80s, but I knew what he would want done with his body. I knew he did not want to be cremated. I knew that, you know, we had an insurance policy that was in place that I would be fine financially. The businesses that we had made, like, so he didn't have to stress or worry about that. And I told him that I was like, don't come back for me if it's because you're afraid that, I won't be okay financially. We talked about emotionally. Like, I remember telling him, I'm like, we had this conversation that if you were to ever have something where your body was disabled, we already made the agreement that if he was in a wheelchair, like let's say, paralyzed from neck down, as long as he had his brain, he would want to be kept alive. Me, no. I was like, if pull the plug, because I'm athletic. I just can't imagine, me being paralyzed the rest of my life and being okay. So we had all of those conversations, and it was so interesting because I would say to him jokingly, and then here's how it came up, is like, hey, that's fine. But I'm gonna like hire you the hottest nurse because I'm not wiping your butt. I'm not bathing you. Like, and we would joke about it, but I was like serious. I was like, that's not a life. And I know it sounds to some people very like loving of a spouse, but when you're present of what you would want to live the rest of your life with and what you would not, I was very clear. Like, I would not be a good nursemaid. I know that I wouldn't. And so we would joke about that. And, that's what I said to him. I was like, hey, if you come back into your body and, you can't get everything back, because at that point he had had all of his, he could move his arms, he could move his legs. They wouldn't let him walk right then, but he was going to the next day before this, um, the doctor made the choice that he made, which ultimately took his life. He had all his faculties back, he was fine. He had a 10-minute memory gap, which actually made the last 5 days of his life very comical, because he had a short-term memory loss of 10 minutes. And so anyway, we had this conversation while he was out of his body. And I just said, if you can't come back and ultimately give it all you got, because the man hated pain. Like, I could take all the pain. He detested pain. And I was like, if you're not going to come back and give it your all and push through, then stay where you're at and I will meet you. And of course, at that time, I'm like bawling in the Starbucks saying, like, don't come back unless you're going to give it your all, and we'll do this together. Like, this will be the story that we move forward and share, with everybody. And so he said, okay. And then I asked him the favor. I said, if you decide that you're going to stay where you're at, just make it very easy for me to make that decision. Like, don't make it where I'm questioning, should I pull the plug or not? Make it so obvious. And then the last thing he said to me, because even during this conversation, I was like, am I really talking to David? I felt like I was, but you just still question it always, because it's just, it's not really publicly talked about that we can talk telepathically, energetically, we are connected. And so David said, I have one request for you now. And I was like, okay, what is it? And he said, I need you to give a message to the doctor. And I said, sure, okay, not knowing what it was going to be. And he said, I want you to tell him that I am okay. that I am actually very happy where I'm at. I'm feeling no pain, and tell him I forgive him. And he did the best that he could with the information that he had, and that it's okay. And so, classic David, he cared so much about other people and just making them feel okay. Um, when I delivered that message to the doctor, I felt the weight of the world coming off of him. Like, and he cried and then held my hand and just said, "Thank you. Thank you for that." Because I think if David wouldn't have given me that message and I wouldn't have followed through and gave it to the doctor, that doctor's life would have been filled with grief the rest of his life, because he had told me earlier that morning, because I asked him point blank, I was like, 24 hours ago, we were like trying to figure out how to fly us home. What happened? Because every day that goes by, I'm going to ask myself the question, could I have done something more? Could I have something different? And he told me, he said, when the port fell out, it might have been my mistake that I shouldn't have let it stay out. It should have gone back in. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Alyssa, this is so beautiful. And I'm so curious because, when we lose a spouse or a child or something, so close to us, like the level of grief is beyond what we could feel with a grandma or, just like this is one of those hardest things, hardest moments of life. And I think sharing this beautiful spiritual experience that you had in that moment, like it just goes to show how wise and how much you're already able to alchemize this and how many like lessons you're already going through. But then obviously, the tragic thing happens. He decides to stay, and you now have to pick up the pieces of this life that you guys built together. So I'm so curious, like what happened next? And I know foretelling that you created a movement out of this, that your healing journey literally became a movement, and that you now give these steps and systemize them to other people. But I would love to know a little bit more about like what happened next for you and also how you were able to give that like literally a box that you give to other people so that they can go through it themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. He died August 31st, and October 30th was his celebration of life. So I had that distraction of creating this beautiful, almost like movie within the confines of my gym. My gymnastics school is where his celebration of life was at. Um, he asked me to bring back the team. So like we had this circle, an inner circle of people that worked for us. He said, bring back the team and see if they agree to do this celebration of life for me. And he met me the second night after he passed, and I wrote down what he wanted for his celebration of life. And it was Narnia themed. He was a huge Narnia fan. And so we had a wardrobe closet that everybody entered in, and then this path of his life. And at every table was his life, from when he was born till he left his life. And then we did a series of video compilations that also matched his life. And so that was great first 2 months of just distraction, giving homage to David, who literally was a legend. And it was his life's like want to be remembered. Like he was so loud and big, and at the end of his life he had ascended within his body, which is a whole nother podcast. Like now looking back, I'm like, oh, that's why he left. Like he literally was love. His energy was love. And so after the celebration, we had earned a trip to the DR as a couple in a company that we represented. And so we had built an 18-month calendar a month before he passed. So that 18-month calendar had all of our traveling. And because I knew I was unwell and not capable of doing anything on my own, thoughts, schedule, I kept that calendar and I just replaced him with people that I felt called to go with me on those experiences. So this first one was the DR, and I brought Emmy, and we were on the beach on like day 2 or day 3. And I remember just getting this huge download saying, do you want to live? And it was true source, God, higher power asking me like, okay, my child, it's time to, let's go, And it was this loving dialogue between me and true source. And I said, yeah, of course I want to live. I have a daughter. I have lots of things to still live for. And then I heard this roar, which is always how God speaks to me when it's very big, like, listen. And he said, how? And it was then that Cocoon to Butterfly began. And it's 9 stages from grief to freedom. And I went forward for about a year and I took time. And some of these stages took months. Some of them took 2 years, which was just, you know, last August. And so honoring that time of grief is not something that you can put in a box. It's not something that you can dictate. And so part of this journey of Cocoon to Butterfly is starting with that premise of just honoring sitting with the feeling, the emotion. And the first one is grief. It's one of the lowest forms of frequency that a human can experience. And I knew I didn't want to stay there, but I didn't know how long I needed to stay there in order to now what we talk about alchemizing or frequency adjustment. And so then, yeah, the birth of Cocoon to Butterfly started with me not knowing that I was going to create a movement, but knowing that I was literally in my cocoon. And my butterfly launched in March after David's death. And then I went through a series of Cocoon to Butterflies, deaths and rebirths to finalize my true authentic self, which is who I am today.
Yeah. Okay, well, I can't wait to ask you more questions about, who you've evolved to become now. And I hear you speak about that a lot. But I'm so curious. You don't have to go through all of them or anything like that. But what are some of the other phases that you think, or the stages that you think were so monumental in doing that and just naming them, and like what goes into that process then? And obviously you don't have to be linear, but I just like want some more there.
Some juice. I would love to leave people with feeling better after watching this very uh, intense podcast because I know it's going to bring up a lot within you that are listening. I mean, that's what's happened so far. Every time I've been on a podcast, it's brought up a lot with even the people that are interviewing me, which is part of the movement. It's part of the movement to move through those emotions and those feels. And the first one is recognizing it, just to kind of probably, and I have said this before, which is so not ironic to be on this podcast, but I'm not been a recovering alcoholic, but my first husband was a functional alcoholic. And so the interesting thing that I have heard is that you have to actually admit that this is, the admittance or the recognition of it. And that's what you have to do with grief too. You have to say, I'm not okay. And it's okay that I'm not okay. This grief doesn't feel well. I feel unwell. I don't feel like I call it peopling. I don't feel like I can be in community. I don't, and I've always been of service. That's just who I am as a person. I knew I couldn't serve anyone in the mental state that I was at. And I knew almost instantly when God said the how, it was to start with me. And so recognizing it as first, accepting it, just acceptance is such an important part of the ascension and frequency adjustment because while you can recognize it, you could still sit in denial. Like, I'm recognizing it, but you know what? I'm forging ahead. I'm going to push through this. Like, that was my old self. And I knew that that would not serve me because it would literally develop into disease. I was already a very intuitive person to myself. And I knew that if I didn't accept it and know that I don't have my shit together, like, this is not normal for Alisa. Alisa always just bootstraps it up and gets the job done. That's not what was happening here. I had to accept that I didn't have the ball. I did not have the ball, and I currently didn't actually fucking want the ball, and to just be okay with that. And then the next one I'd like to share is to speak to it, like have a conversation with it. Like, wow, friend, I don't like you here, but you're here. So actually like recognizing where it was in my body, and it did move all over in time. And then when I settled into the next couple of phases, it would always be in my solar plexus. So we all have chakras. My indicator of a yes or a no is always through my solar plexus. And so that's where when I call them waves, sometimes tsunamis, when the grief would noose me again early on in the stages, um, it would feel like very hard right here and heavy and almost feel like I had an ulcer. I've never had an ulcer, but it was what I like felt like an ulcer would feel like this very abrasive, burning sensation. That's what would happen there. And so I would sit in it, recognize it, accept it, and just have a conversation with it and actually nurture it, like, what are you here for? Why am I feeling this? And sometimes the answer would come and sometimes it wouldn't. And I would have to, not necessarily people, because the way that David and I set myself up, I took a whole year off from working, which was a beautiful gift that neither of us expected to have, which is also something that I teach people. I'm the COO for Tribute Wealth Management and the CEO of Tribute. His dad had died a year before, and we had done business together in one of our businesses that we had. And so we came together. I'm the COO for his company now, and we help educate people how to not just prepare for death, but actually to live in your body currently in this human experience through financial education. But ultimately, what helped me was when David died, that I was pretty well taken care of. And I got to take that year off. And I remember having conversations with other people that had seen similar friends of theirs go through almost identical situations, a death of a spouse, and I didn't know them. And they saw that person living out their first year after their spouse versus me. I'm traveling the world, I'm inviting friends. I'm being very transparent and honest about the pain that I'm going through, but I'm doing it on the beaches of Bali and Hawaii and Florida and back to Europe twice after David died, while they're in comparison watching that person having to sell their house, move in with their family because of financial burden that happened after the death of their spouse. So while I kind of went a little bit full circle, I think it was very important and to give your audience that, the reason why I was able to sit and experience what I did was because I didn't have to worry about finances. It wasn't even on my radar versus other people that might have young children that are now like, what do I do? I think that's something that we have to accept and understand about your own individual human experience, that you are going to go through these stages with a different experience than I had. And I would argue that although outside it looks amazing, like who wouldn't want to travel and go through these stages, but I wouldn't trade it with anyone. Like it was still epically painful because the person that was supposed to be on these trips was not there. He was replaced with somebody else. And that was a blatantly obvious thing as I was traveling and doing this 18-month calendar. So, yeah, so hopefully that helped you and your audience understand a little bit what's in the box experience.
Yeah. You've talked a lot about how you have shed past versions of yourself, the death and the rebirth, and you've really become a different version of yourself, a more evolved version of yourself today than you were before. You've talked a lot about how, like, even a past energy you might have had or past, like, modem of operating was, like, present that's, like, gone now. She's died, she's gone. I'm so curious, like, who is this version of you today? How has she changed from before this happened?
Yeah, I want to share with you like the biggest one, the biggest shift of who I'm no longer. Uh, the previous version of Alyssa Muller, who also had gone through a lot of deaths and rebirths up until that point, but I never recognized it. Um, she would have argued she was the most independent, fierce, can get the job done, get all the things accomplished, whatever's thrown her way. She got the ball. It's no big deal. What I realized through that is I was actually and loved herself. There was two key things that when I went through there's balloons on the screen. That was wild. The two key things that I did when I was going back to burn down all that I was, because that's really what you have to do. You literally have to burn who you are to the ground and then rebuild. I got to have like almost like a celebration of my life and lives. And so what I discovered is I dated to marry. I literally had never had a meal by myself ever. I was very codependent, uh, which still is shocking saying it out loud. And I did not actually love myself fully. And through this final phase of who I am now, I am not codependent, but I also recognize that when my divine partner comes in, that some of those codependency aspects are still okay. Like it's not that I was wrong or bad being always married, and in between marriages only a year between one marriage or the other. The first marriage was 14 years, David was 16 years, and in the middle was dating David. And also my daughter was there. So that's why I never had a meal alone, you know, and recognizing that, never having spent the night in my house by myself for the most part. I mean, there was probably some times in my life I was at home alone, but for the most part, never, And so all of those things now, and I'll share with you this like very authentic thing is I got comfortable with that too. And that could have been a problem, being fiercely independent and not codependent. Like there's facets of both that are not going to serve you well. And so just recognizing that, and recognizing that the self-love that now I have in who I am, I tolerated myself before
Mm.
because I loved that I was an achiever. I loved that I showed up for people. I loved that no matter if you were in my inner circle, I took care of you. I was there for you. But I was never truly there for myself. Because I would always tell our tribes, like, put your oxygen mask on. It's so important for you to take care of yourself first so that you can help others. And I recognized that while I did do that, it was just enough for sustainability so that I could go and help and fix and coach, and through the discovery of I will never take my oxygen mask off again for anyone. It will always be on permanently because that is truly loving yourself. And it's not selfish. It's actually selfless. And to show that and to model that for other people is part of the movement. The other thing too that's it's so fascinating is that while I was so proud of how much I helped people, I was hindering people. No one needs to be fixed. We have everything that we need within us. And what is most important is to awaken to that and take off the layers so that you live your authentic self. There's nothing wrong with us. It's about finding truly home within ourselves.
Mm.
That's what we're here to do. Yeah.
Oh, so you are so profound.
Thanks.
You've used this word a few times, and I wanted to kind of get it down to basics, but you've talked about how this journey has kind of led to ascension and that the grief can be an experience that leads to ascension. Now, if we were going to break this down into like layman's terms, what the heck are we talking about?
So interesting because I sometimes throw around words that I would have been like, okay, next. Like this woman is off a rocker, or this is all woo-woo stuff, whatever. And all that when I talk about ascension, it's we've been, I believe, programmed and brainwashed to think that this ascension is to be the highest and best version of ourselves. And really all it is to recognize our dark and our light and love both, honor both, recognize both. Um, and then also the recalibration within our bodies of divine feminine and divine masculine. And what I did through, these stages of grief to freedom is I found that I was doing what I helped all my tribe members do before, which is become a better version of yourself. But I'm doing it in a different way, which is everything that I have is within me and it's just finding it. And so that's the internal ascension. And the ascension is not a ladder that we climb. It's actually, it's almost like our our authentic self is there. It's in the ethers, and we're ascending it into like our being as we're having this human experience. And that might not land or come home to you, and it might be better to articulate it in a different way, but that's at this point how I can describe it, because it's not a place you go, it's not a destination. It literally is not over, and even David shared with me where he's at now. There's ascension there too, as he's helping the collective going through what it is that we're going through right now, and we all feel it, whether you're in this space of understanding energy, and that we're all actually one, and we're going through this as a collective. He's helping that. He's helping the frequency adjust for humanity. And I'm excited to be still locking arms with him, where he's at and where I'm at. And I believe that's, those of you that are listening, it's going to click for you like a kaleidoscope. It's like click, 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 and then boom, it's just this beautiful sight. That's what happens when you meet yourself for the first time, and it is confusing at first, because I didn't just meet myself all of a sudden and it was like, whoo, I showed up. It literally was like an internal fight of Alisa Muller that was still here going, wait, wait, wait. You need to be needed. Like, you have to achieve things or you're not worthy of love. And those are the things that I had to work through, because that isn't love.
Mm. And you were putting this so beautifully together in a live experience for people, a live event around the grief and the cocoon to butterfly experience. Can you tell us all about that?
Yeah, well, I'm excited that even though you'll be out of country, you're still going to be a part of it. So I'm so excited to have you be as one of the speakers on the stage of Cocoon to Butterfly. So while I was in Brazil, when I met this beautiful soul, I had a dream within a dream. And it literally was me sharing the stage with 12 other speakers, the 9 stages of Cocoon to Butterfly, where you'll go to this live event, you'll pick up your box, and we'll go through the stages together in a 2-day experience. And it's an immersion. And this download that I got, honestly, like all the downloads, it's like, really? Am I going to do this? Because David and I used to do live events. And at first, I'm a little bit kicking and screaming, going, no, no, no. And then as it like really resides in me, and I honor it and accept it for what it is if this is truly, I'm a conduit for this movement, it does need to have an experience that is private to yourself, which is the Cocoon to Butterfly box that comes to your home, and you can do it alone or with some friends that you gather once a week and you go through it, because the 9 stages, you can do that week by week. Or you go to this live event because you want to be in community. You actually want to be going through these stages, asking questions, being around other people that are going through the same thing. And when I got that download and I realized, oh, of course, like there are going to be some people that don't want to be alone going through this. They want to be in community. It was a hell yes. This is what I'm signing up for. So yeah, it's June 28th and 29th. And if you're watching this later, it's 2025. The download was that I would start with one, and throughout the year, there would be one every quarter. And then the year after, there would be one every single month around the United States. So, this is another journey of mine, accepting this and having run many, many businesses and systemizing them, and saying that part of Alisa and David Muller like goodbye to, now building businesses in the divine feminine, but still having to fill rooms, still having to serve people with introducing products like the box, but doing it in a divine feminine, which is very foreign to me. But having said goodbye to the alpha female of like, got to get a seat. There's only 300, there's only 200, there's only 100 left, get yours, that is no longer me. And it's honestly no longer in the collective. Like if you're being pressured to be somewhere, run, don't walk from that, because that's your indicator of it's not aligned with you. It should be an invitation that comes to you, and it shows up of like, I don't know what is happening internally, but I have to be at that event. And that is what I've awakened to, is basically just being on podcasts like yours and sharing this movement, and knowing that those that this hits in their heart, or maybe they want to be a part of it like you as a speaker, be a part of like locking arms, and taking like almost ownership of this, because it isn't mine. I'm just a conduit for it. Then yes, we need to connect. You need to be at a live event, or you need to contact me if you feel like, wow, this resonated so much, and my story needs to be shared on stage or on a podcast that is the Cocoon to Butterfly podcast that I just launched yesterday. Then yes, it's a yes.
Well, we're gonna put all the juicy details in the show notes and stuff, and just remind everyone where's the location of it.
Yeah, so great question. It's in Tacoma, Washington, and it's just 30 minutes north of where I actually just moved from. I lived there since I was 11. I'm 53 now, and I'm in St. George, Utah, which is a whole nother podcast of how I landed here, in this journey of Cocoon to Butterfly. So yeah, so it'll be at the Tacoma Convention Center, just a beautiful place to have our very first live experience.
And just to summarize, like who is this event so perfect for?
Yeah, so you know, if you're feeling called or aligned to, it's not like a Tony Robbins event where you're changed. And I love Tony Robbins. I've been to his events lots, but it's more of like you're going to be left with tools and equipment, so that you're not just left changed, but you're left changed in a way that when you go to your life, where now you've had some ascension movement in the last 48 hours, you're going to understand that the other people that are in your life are, one, not going to understand what you just went through, and two, you're going to have, oh, I just did a thumbs up, you're going to have an experience where you're going to be tested. And so the tools that we'll leave you with will literally help you be able to frequency adjust on your own, without me, without the speakers on stage. And so if you feel aligned with, for the live event especially, that you want to be in community with other people that are going through this work with, so that then you can also leave and almost have like a family that has had this experience with you that you could connect with after the fact, then yeah, the live event is definitely for you.
Yeah. And so it's like someone going through grief or loss and wants to like really heal through the spiritual lens and really, become this beautiful version of themselves. I think it'd be just so needed in this world, I think that oftentimes we go through something and then we get blasted with this feeling of being so alone, like nobody else locally understands what I'm going through, or like it just feels so isolating sometimes. And there's these little community events here and there, but I truly think what you're doing is building a movement where so many people need support like this, and this level of, like you said, growth and alchemizing that grief, that experience into something so beautiful and to so much beautiful lessons to share back with the world. And I'm so honored to be a part of it as a speaker. And I just hope that, whoever's listening right now, if you're touched to come and you're just feeling that fire and that light inside of you, like just don't second guess it. Like just get yourself there. It's going to be such a special experience.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And I want to just remind those that are listening that grief is not always the death of a human. Like in my case, grief can be a loss of a job, it can be a divorce, empty nester. And honestly, like, we go through grief every day. And so this movement will help you basically live a daily with, and I know it sounds cheesy, but no more bad days, because you're going to have bad moments or challenges, but you're going to know how to alchemize the frequency and adjust, and not need someone else. Like, literally, you're going to have it within yourself. So thank you.
You're such a
Oh my gosh, I'm so honored and so grateful that that you had me on your podcast, and that this will live on also. I love this.
you're such a great embodiment of your message. Like you're living proof of everything you're saying. So thank you so much for bringing us your wisdom and leading us through your story. It was really special.
All right. Sending you all love.